US sends dozens hypersonic missiles to fight China in South China Sea. The governor of a Japanese territory, where the Pentagon is thinking about basing missiles capable of threatening China, has a message for the United States: "Not on my island." "I firmly oppose the idea," said Governor Denny Tamaki, the governor of Okinawa, in an email to the Times. Officials in other Asian countries are also signaling they don't want them. But Pentagon planners aren't backing down after the Trump administration withdrew last year from a 33-year-old arms control treaty that barred US land-based intermediate-range missiles in Asia. Senior officials now say that putting hundreds of American missiles with non-nuclear warheads in Asia would quickly and cheaply shift the balance of power in the Western Pacific back in the United States' favor amid growing Pentagon concern that China's expanding arsenal of missiles and other military capabilities threaten US bases in the region and have emboldened Beijing to menace US allies in Asia. The missile plan is the centerpiece of a planned buildup of US military power in Asia, projected to consume tens of billions of dollars in the defense budget over the next decade, a major shift in Pentagon spending priorities away from the Middle East. But it also highlights the complex relationship between the US and its Asian allies, many of whom feel increasingly threatened by China but are reluctant to back new US military measures that might provoke Beijing, which has built the biggest navy in the world in the last decade. Australia and the Philippines publicly ruled out hosting American missiles when the Trump administration first floated the idea last year. South Korea is also considered an unlikely location, current and former officials say. In Japan, the decision on whether to allow US missiles on its territory will be made by the central government in Tokyo. Governor Tamaki said officials at the Pentagon and in Tokyo have told him there are no definite plans to put missiles on Okinawa. But Tamaki isn't reassured. With a Japanese mother and an American father who served with the Marines on Okinawa before abandoning the family, Tamaki personifies the complex relationship between the US and its allies in Asia. He was elected 2 years ago after pledging to oppose expansion of the already substantial US military presence on the island. More than half of the 50,000 US military personnel stationed in Japan are in Okinawa, most concentrated at a marine base surrounded by residential areas in the largest city. Opposition to the 70-year-old US military presence has sparked local protests for years, which would probably intensify if there were a move to base missiles there. If there is such a plan, I can easily imagine fierce opposition from Okinawa residents, Tamaki said. For the last year, the Pentagon has been testing several new types of short and intermediate-range missiles, those with ranges up to 3,400 miles, including a ballistic missile that could be placed in Guam, a US territory, and mobile missiles carried on trucks. The first of the new weapons could be in operation within 2 years, though no decision has been announced about where they will be based. Similar missiles are now carried on US warships and planes based in Asia, but there are no land-based systems. US officials say that many allies are privately supportive of the missile plan and may come around to permitting them on their territory, but don't want to provoke opposition from Beijing and their own public before decisions are on the table. The US has a defense treaty with Japan, as it does with South Korea, the Philippines and Australia. Taiwan is not a formal ally, but has close, unofficial defense ties with Washington. "We are very attentive to our allies' concerns, and we recognize their political challenges," said a senior defense official, who agreed to discuss Pentagon planning if he was not identified. "Everything that's said in the media is not necessarily what's said behind closed doors." To lessen the political opposition, the US could rotate missile batteries in and out of locations around the region or place them in strategic locations without publicly disclosing it. It wouldn't make much sense to announce plans now, which would stoke Chinese anger and possibly play into the domestic politics, said Randy Shriver, who was a senior Pentagon official responsible for Asia until his resignation last year. A decision to go ahead in Asia would intensify an arms race between the region's two biggest powers, whose relations already tense over President Trump's confrontational trade agenda, and Chinese President Xi Jinping's hawkish policies have nosedived since the coronavirus outbreak. "It's naive and dangerous," said Alexandra Bell, a former Obama administration arms control official and a critic of deploying U.S. missiles. "Instead of looking at how we can prevent a full-out arms race, that's our opening salvo?" added Bell, a senior policy director at the Center for Arms Control and Nonproliferation in Washington. Putting land-based missiles in Asia capable of attacking China is not a new strategy. In the 1950s and 1960s, the U.S. kept them at bases across the region, including in Okinawa, where hundreds of nuclear-armed warheads were stored secretly for decades, even though Japan's constitution prohibited the presence of nuclear weapons on its territory. The missiles were gradually taken out of service in the 1960s and 1970s because of budget cuts and a shift in U.S. strategy away from defense of the region focused on nuclear weapons. In 1987, the Reagan administration signed an arms control treaty that prohibited the U.S. and the Soviet Union, and later Russia, from deploying any land-based intermediate-range missiles, including in Asia. China was not a signatory, leaving it free to build up its missile arsenal. The Trump administration withdrew from the treaty last year after accusing Russia of developing new land-based missiles that violated its terms. The exit opened the way for the Pentagon to consider reintroducing ground-launched missiles in Asia. With mobile missiles around the region, the U.S. could pose an even bigger challenge for China, forcing it to hunt for hundreds of launchers capable of targeting its planes, ships and bases, strategists say.